Hey everybody, this is Alex from Heavy New York, and we are here with another fellow Alex. We are here with Alex of Silver Snakes. Thank you so much for your time, man.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have you here. Death and the Moon is your newest record. You just want to give a run on how the making of the record's been and the record cycle thus far?
Yeah, it's been long. The record's been done since about last summer, and we started writing it a few years ago, kind of in hotel rooms and just on tour in the van. And it's definitely a shift from our last record. It leans much more heavily on the electronic aspect of things, and that's like a world we wanted to dive deeper towards. And making it was cool. I produced the record, and we got to work with a lot of cool mix engineers on the record. Michael Patterson did all the singles, and he's worked with it's. If you look him up, he did the Social Network soundtrack, and he's worked with like Nine Inch Nails, How to Destroy Angels. For me, I'm nerd over the fact that he worked with like TLC and like the Notorious B.I.G. and Puff Daddy. He did all like the really cool like hip hop stuff I liked when I was like in middle school. So yeah, it was really cool. And all those involved kind of made this whole thing come together. And it was a very scattered mess for a minute putting it together, but it somehow worked out, and like we're so happy with this record, and like can't wait to finally be playing these songs for people. And this tour has been the perfect venue for us to be showcasing this new like stylistic shift.
Yeah. You mentioned that you had like more of an emphasis on the electronic feel for this record. Was that like a preconceived idea, or did it kind of just happen that way?
It's been a slow burn, but I mean that's always what I've wanted to do. That's my background, I'm a child of the 90s, I guess. So I grew up with all of that stuff, and I grew up listening to bands like Garbage. That was like my, one of my all-time favorite bands. I would say that's probably the biggest influence on Silver Snakes is like stuff like Garbage, the Smashing Pumpkins, like some Nine Inch Nails stuff. And then more than anything, like the overall aesthetic of some things like, the Crow soundtrack and like stuff like Queen of the Damned and all this stuff that some people thought was kind of cheesy back then. And even I kind of cringed at, you know what I mean? It loved Depeche Mode, but a lot of it kind of just comes full circle, and we kind of paid our dues and did the whole thing in a bunch of different hardcore bands and heavy bands, and I produced heavy bands back in LA, and this is just a fun challenge, and it is challenging and it's hard, and I want to make sure that we pay our dues in this scene as well. I'm definitely not just trying to jump into this and expecting to win over all these fans that have been into this longer than we have, to be honest, you know what I mean? So I just want to show them like, hey, we're fans of the same stuff, and let's do the damn thing.
Yeah. Now, when I was curious about, listening to the record, I got it early, but I thought this was a very experimental style of music. I thought there was many different elements coming from different sources. Being an experimental style band, does that make it a little bit easier to kind of try new things?
Yeah, I feel like the easiest way to put it is that you reach a certain point as a musician or as a songwriter where you start influencing yourself more than relying on others to influence you. And of course, you pull little pieces from the things that are like ingrained in like your like stamp as a musician, you know what I mean? Like the way I said, like Garbage, Smashing Pumpkins, those bands are like, I learned how to play my instrument from listening to those bands, but when it comes to writing music, there's never a time where you sit down being like, okay, we got to do something like them. It's just like, here's what comes out. And it's pretty liberating to not be playing just strictly like aggressive music, or just, it being a rock band confined to just like two guitars, bass, and drums, the way I kind of felt like we were for a long time. And that's self-imposed. By no means did I feel any pressure, other than that. But it does feel liberating to just kind of do what we want. And if I'm gonna program a song, and the fact that the guys in the band are cool with me coming to a rehearsal or on a phone call or in the group chat, and me just saying like, hey, I got this new idea, like there's no drums, I got this new idea, like you're not playing bass on this, you're gonna play synth on this. And and it's been really cool because I feel like we got comfortable for a long time, and our records definitely shift from album to album. Like the first record straight up just sounds like a melodic rock record, and then from there on it got a little more like in the stoner realm, and then kind of mixed it more with the heavy influences, and now this is just the next chapter in it. And I'm excited to see where we go from here. I want to dive even deeper into this, and I'm having a lot of fun not standing there playing guitar the entire time, because that's all I've done in this band since we started. And now I get to like be up there and play the synth. I get to play like some samples and do all that stuff, and it's a lot of fun.
It seems like you've involved incredibly as a musician in terms of, songwriting, and performance wise as well. There's some musicians, they evolve in just the songwriting process and everything like that, but it seems like for you with this record, you didn't just evolve your sound, you evolved your stage presence as well.
Yeah, I mean, we had to pull all those pieces together because when you're playing as just a rock band, people know what they're going to get. They know they're going to go up there and see a couple guys with guitars, drums, bass, and some singers. You know what I mean? And we did some large tours in the last few years, and, we went out with Korn and did these arena tours. And it was like, how do we stand out in all of this and make it our own? You know what I mean? So that's been a challenge, but we pulled it together. We're doing a lot of cool like live production type things. We teamed up with this guy in LA who goes by Cloaking, and we found him because he worked with Autolux, and he's done stuff with a lot of local DJs, and he does a lot of these like goth night type events, and he just does like projection mapping. And we sent him the record, and he dug it, and we loved his work, so he was able to sync an entire show to our show. So it's cool because we get to come out here on tour and showcase all of his art as well while we're playing, and it's tailor made to coincide with our music.
Definitely, I see that a lot. Now, one thing I'm really curious about is, and I don't get to have this discussion as often as I'd like to, because being a songwriter, to me, being able to write songs is a completely different talent altogether than just knowing how to play an instrument. You could be as good as Randy Rhoads on the guitar, but you could suck at songwriting, and vice versa. For you, how different of like a mind frame is it on the songwriting process versus playing these songs? Like, do you write these songs with the intention of playing them live and thinking about how it's going to be executed that way?
I always had in the past, and this is one of the first records where I didn't let that weigh on me. You know what I mean? There's been a lot of times in past records where it's like, okay, I want to do this part, but I can't play this and sing at the same time. Or I want to do this, but there's only two guitarists. Or you know what I mean? Like, how are we going to pull this off? And with this time, with this record in particular, it's been really cool to just break all those rules and then have to deal with it later, which is also extremely stressful because, this is on this tour is when we're playing these songs for the very first time, like as a band as well. So much of this record was made in the studio. We never once were in a room together writing these songs. Oh, wow. So it was me doing like all the programming at home, and I would just stay up all night and I became just this crazy night owl making this record. And I'd go to my studio and start layering stuff over it. But the necessity that was involved with recording at home and the limitations kind of shaped the record. You know what I mean? So instead of worrying about like, I need all these giant tones and this, and I need this big roomy drum sound for this, like I had in the past, it was like, no, I want this to sound mechanical. I want this to sound chopped up. I want this to sound sampled. You know what I mean? So it was fun to just stay up all night, manipulate things, and do things differently. And that lent a hand in the songwriting of all of it. It pushed the songwriting, but I'd like to think that the hooks are still there and like all the things that we had on previous albums in terms of like, I can't get away from the fact that this band is like vocal driven. You know what I mean? As much as I'd like to, like I hate the sound of my own voice, and it's one of those things that makes me cringe, and I hate writing the lyric parts and all that, but the melodies are there from the get-go. Yeah. As soon as like, whether it's the first drum beat, sequence, whatever, like I already have a melody, and then it's just like, cool, now I gotta figure out how to make this happen.
I feel like your band has the best of both worlds. I see that you guys are very rhythm driven, but very melody driven as well. There's some bands like Meshuggah, for example. I mean, that's a very rhythm driven band, but then you have like a lot of symphonic bands or rock bands that are very melody driven. I think for you guys, and really this electric style of music, that you have the best of both worlds with it. Cool. Yeah. Now, one thing I was really curious about, I have 2 questions for you. Do you like to leave your music open to interpretation, or do you like to kind of pass on a certain message? Are you trying to maybe get your listeners to see things from a certain point of view?
It changes a lot. For a long time I was just uncomfortable as a front man, just insecure with my own voice and my lyrics and all that stuff. And over the years I've become more, I don't want to say I'm more comfortable with it now, but I've really accepted like where I'm at as a musician, as a singer, and as a performer, and as a lyricist, too, because sometimes I forget that's part of all this, because I spend so much time worrying about bringing the music together. As far as interpretation, with every record, I tell people, okay, there's a theme, and I'm going to lay it out for them, and if they get it, they get it. If they don't, they don't. But I've never really shied away from talking about it, you know what I mean? I haven't put it completely out there, and with this record, it took a lot of forms. You know, I had an idea from the get-go that Death in the Moon was going to be this record about this whole like hypothetical group of people that it was like basically a cult that worshiped the moon, and one day the moon it was going to be destroyed somehow, or just some kind of apocalyptic type theme, and just like the repercussions and like what would happen to the world and what would happen in our lives if it was all taken over by automation. We couldn't sleep anymore, and you know, trying to tie in themes of sleep deprivation, which in turn led to me being like an insomniac while making this record. And then once the record started coming together more, it kind of turned into two halves, and it went from, you know, how we spoke earlier about it was originally Death of the Moon. It turned into Death and the Moon, and I had, you know, a big loss in my family. I lost my godfather, which was like major for me, and it was the first really massive death I've ever dealt with, and it was while we were writing the record, and I started to see that the way the songs were coming out were in halves. And, you know, being a diehard Smashing Pumpkins fan, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, you have like Dawn to Dusk, Twilight to Starlight, which are the two halves of that. So I thought it'd be really cool to have like one side is Death, the other side's the Moon. And to me, when I listen to it, that's how it's laid out. The first half of the record, beginning with Smoke Dance, Worship, all those tracks, the first song on the record is 100% about like self-harm and like dealing with being a musician on the road and hearing about other musicians taking their own lives and abusing themselves. Whereas the second half of the record is just inspired by those late nights, you know, being up at night and trying to forget all of that, and just those voices in your head that won't shut off when you're trying to forget about things, you know. Like, I feel like, you know, it might be a little dark, but it's one thing that everyone has in common is just reflecting on your own mortality at times, and that keeps a lot of people up at night, and it definitely keeps me up at night. And it was unexpected, but it ended up being a pretty heavy theme in the album.
Wow, that's actually really nice. Like, I almost don't want to get my own interpretation of it. I think by you saying that, you actually made people want to listen for that message on the record. And the final question I ask you, and I always love it's almost kind of like a troll question at this point. How do you know when a song is finished?
Well, aside from the band, I produce bands, I record bands for a living. Yeah. So that's probably the worst question for me, because I'm one of those guys that has a desktop on my computer that's just like final 1, final 2, final 3. So, I mean, we'll put it this way, like we're doing a lot of stuff on tracks on this record, live, because obviously we would need like 3 other guys on stage playing synthesizers and sequencers to pull it off. And we play as much as we can of it, but I was adjusting some of the tracks this morning and like late last night for this show in particular. And while I was doing it, I was like, damn, it would have been really cool if I added like this piano part to this. And I'm already messing around adding all these sequences to songs that have been done for well over a year. So I don't think songs, honestly, are ever finished. Just abandoned. Yeah, I don't even want to say they're abandoned, because we're performing songs live. Like on this run, we're playing the song Glass from our last record, Saboteur. And every night I sing it a little different. Every night I add something different on guitar. So I feel like the songwriting of these pieces continues to evolve. Whereas, you know, what's captured on the actual recording is there. But if people, you know, if they keep seeing us, if they come out to the tours, they're always going to hear these alternative, you know, presentations of those songs.
I don't know if you do you remember Kato Kanwala, the producer? He sadly passed, but he always said a song is complete when there's nothing left to take out. So
that's another way of looking at it.
Yeah. For me, it's until there's nothing left to add in.
I was going to say, meanwhile, here I am just trying to layer as many things as I can. But
if you don't mind, I actually have one question, because you just mentioned that. Being a producer for other bands, does that at all maybe help influence your craft behind your music as well?
Definitely. It makes it much easier. It's much more convenient, because I don't have to rely on someone else to show. I'm inspired by sounds more than anything. So whereas some people would get something in their head and then spend weeks, months, maybe, who knows, years sometimes, trying to figure out how to capture those sounds, or having to turn to someone else to help them like, you know, create those sounds. I feel like I can sit there and I already know what to reach for, how to make it happen. And of course, like, recording and producing your own music is a total pain. Mixing it, especially. This is the first album where I actually mixed some of the songs. I've always shied away from it, but we had 4 different mixing engineers on this record. Wow. And, you know, it was Michael Patterson, who I mentioned earlier, Samford Parker, who did Pelican Records, and he has a project with Scott Kelly. He's incredible at like electronic based music. He's done remixes for us. and our friend Chris, who's from France, who we met as a live sound engineer with The Ocean and some other big like metal bands. Okay. And getting to work with all of them, I felt like I really had to step up my game, and just, you know, I couldn't shy away from it. So I picked the 3-4 songs on the record that I really thought that I could kill the mix on, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. And like I said, it just made that whole process a lot easier, you know, not having to lean on someone else to kind of guide me through that.
I mean, it's great when you have the skills and everything to work by yourself, but wisdom from others could be a great blessing as well.
And I don't shy away from asking for help. And I've been fortunate enough to become friends with a lot of great producers, and even Michael Patterson, who mixed those songs. I was working on like an electronic record a few months ago that was very like 80s, early 90s inspired, kind of like Paula Abdul style stuff. And I hit him up and I'm like, can you meet up with me? Like, I just need to pick your brain about this. And we sat there and he was telling me, this is how Depeche Mode recorded their keyboards. This is how so-and-so did it. And my good friend Sonny, he was an intern with Flood who worked on the Smashing Pumpkins records. He was an engineer for him. So getting to pick his brain about things while we were doing this record. Hey man, how would you go about this and this? And it's cool. It's a really cool network to have, and it's very different rather than just bouncing ideas off of fellow musicians. Bouncing ideas off of fellow producers is a whole other ballpark, you know what I mean? So I feel like that lends itself to our records, especially this new one.
Yeah, definitely. So before we go, I'd like to thank you so much for your time.
Of course, thank you.
Just your newest record, Death in the Moon. It's a brand new record cycle. This is going to be uploaded by midnight. So is there just anything else you would like to promote with the band after your tour with Combi Christ, if you're allowed to talk about it?
Just, you know, the record comes out May 3rd, and we want to just keep going at it. You know, we took a break for about 1.5 years to make this record. So once it's out, we're going to be out there. So, you know, if people want to come check us out or see what's going on, then they could look us up, you'rethesnakes.com, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff, and it'll all be there.
Awesome. Well, Alex, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Everybody, we are here with Alex of Silver Snakes, Death in the Moon. Pick that up, and we'll see you next time on Heavy New York.